Hi, everybody. It's October 17th, 2024, and this is the weekly Backdrop Developer Meeting. We get together every week to talk about development priorities for Backdrop CMS. We've got a handful of folks here. We'll start with introductions. My name is Nate Lampton. Quick sketch on the internet. I'm core committer and technical lead for the Backdrop project. We'll go around the room and let everybody give a little introduction to who they are. And we'll start with Tim and go to Martin.
Hi, my name is Tim Erickson. I'm St. Paul TM. I'm here in Deerwood, Minnesota, where I was just telling everyone we are in the midst of peak autumn colors, so it's really gorgeous. And that's been distracting me from my background work. But it won't last long, so I'll be back at the grindstone shortly. Whoever's next can go.
Yeah, Martin and then Jen.
Hi, I'm Martin, Yorkshire Pudding around Backdrop, and I'm a Backdrop developer for System Horizons in Northeast England. Yeah, and whoever's next.
Jen and then Joseph.
Jen Lampton, joining from Oakland, California. I am in the middle of three very large, complicated backdrop upgrades, and so hopefully going to be in the queue a lot more in the near future.
Jen, and finally Joseph.
Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm a developer from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am a core committer for Backdrop. Yeah. And I'll be in the Bay Area next week for BADCamp.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, community events. We do have Bad Camp coming up next week, and there is a Backdrop Summit on Friday of that event. Yeah, Jen and I and Joseph will be in attendance, as well as
Yeah, there we go.
Irina, who's
Irina.
primarily advocating for the or organizing that event. She's also a member of the project management committee. So yeah, should have a pretty good backdrop contingency there. Curious, like to see if we get much of an audience, but we'll the backdrop team will be there in force. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Also, we have Backdrop Live coming up November 14th and 15th. Registration's open.
And the registration can be found at
events.backdropcms.org.
great. Let's see, blog posts. We're still dragging our feet on getting out the blog post for 129.0. We have a draft of that, and we're hoping to get that wrapped up shortly. That would be great to have some screenshots in there, and then push that out via the Backdrop News channels. But we're working on it. There's also some contrib updates from this week. Jen, do you want to do those, even though?
Sure. So in the project list, we have slideshow recipe and name fields that have come out in the last week. And I think we also have a handful of new contributors. We had a couple people that came in as maintainers of existing contrib projects, which was nice to get a little more support.
Yeah, also in the world of contrib working, I put it on the agenda here, even though this was something that is very brand new, but something that you've been working on, Jen, the B extension for DDEV, which is DDEV issue 5740. And I think most people are familiar with DDEV, but it's a Docker-based tool for running sites locally. Has excellent support for Backdrop and other. It was originally for Drupal, but also has expanded to be very popular in some other communities like Typo3. So very excited to have excellent support for Backdrop in DDEV, but this is another great advancement in DDEV support for Backdrop. The issue is 5740, and Jen made some progress this week on pushing this capability forward. You want to talk about it at all?
Sure. So I created an add-on. It was something that Randy had requested that we do in the issue, adding Beta native Backdrop. And there's a template for DDEV that makes it pretty easy to create an add-on for DDEV. So I just copied the template, changed a couple of things to make sure it installed B, and then published it to my personal GitHub repository. So if you want to install B on your DDEV backdrop site, inside your DDEV environment, you just type DDEV get Jen Lampton slash DDEV backdrop B separated by hyphens. I do think this should live in the backdrop ops group, or maybe even the backdrop contrib group, but I know that Wilbur had originally volunteered to work on it. And so I wanted to make sure that if he already had a working version, we started with his. But he hasn't added a comment in the issue for a while, and I needed it yesterday, so I just tried it to see how much work it would be. So yeah, I don't know if he's done more than I've done, but I have a bare minimum example there. It just sets up B. It doesn't do anything else. But yeah, I'd love it if people used it, and let me know if there's anything else I should be adding. I'd love it particularly if Wilbur would let me know if he's done more, because I don't want to be duplicating efforts with him. So I'll reach out to him, maybe on Zulip.
Yeah, what I'm really excited about, I think that having this the extension that connects B and DDEV is a great step, but it really sets us up for when you do the DDEV backdrop recipe, it will just include B. And that will be so great that there will be no more manual installation. If you use DDEV, you just get B and just there. That would be very exciting.
If there are instructions, we can update what the documentation in B says about DDEV. So.
Oh, great.
Jan, I know that one of your issues with DDEV that I heard a rumor you might have got solved was the ability to symlink to other projects. Did somebody
Yes.
help you solve that?
No.
Because I have a colleague of mine suggested something that might work. So I'll try to.
I have solved it.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes. Nobody helped me. I think I had to fight. It was painful.
Okay.
I wish they'd helped me. But I did find a solution, and I posted in the Backdrop forum where people were talking about it. And then I dropped a link to the forum post in the DDEV Discord channel where people were talking about it. So the answer should be in the forum if anyone needs it for their own work. But this is specifically how I handle contrib contribution.
Right.
And there was someone in the Drupal community who was doing the same thing. So we were both brainstorming how to get symlinks working in DDEV. And it turns out you can mount your shared location in DDEV as another source, but then you have to make the paths match. So that's a little tricky.
Okay.
But yeah, I put my solution in there with my paths so people see how that setup works.
Great.
Great. Yeah, I'm very excited as a frequent DDEV user and B user. All right. We have a number of items that are in the 1.30 milestone, but before we get to that, I want to talk about the one issue we have in the 129 milestone. I mean, there's lots of issues in the 129 milestone, but one that could use some attention that was raised is this issue 2237. It's a pull request that needs review, and it has to do with correcting importing config for taxonomy vocabularies that yeah, you can see the steps to reproduce are right here. That it can happen pretty easily and pretty frequently, that if you're creating a new vocabulary via config, then Martin pointed out it used to be notices, but in newer versions of PHP, it's now been upgraded to warnings. And so it's starting to nag more frequently. And yeah, I think we're just surfacing it for visibility. If somebody gets a chance to take a look at this one, it would be a nice thing to get into the 129.2 release. Pretty simple set of changes. Just a handful of lines here. Martin, do you have anything else you wanted to add about this one?
No, I mean, it's already had a good few eyes on it, and we've refined it for where it was before. It was just kind of, it was getting rid of it, and I think we've done with the help of Paderno and RG Piano. It's now a more, and yourself as well, quick, Nate. We've now got a more thorough improvement to that process.
I kind of broke our policy here, but I went ahead and put this in the 129.2 milestone as something that's very close, that should be prioritized. Okay, let's see. Yeah, let's talk about the 1.30 milestone, just generally speaking. My goodness, it's been a great week for the 1.30 milestone. So 2 weeks ago, there were 0 issues in the 1.30 milestone, and now there's 12. So that's great. I think that we've had a lot of advocates step up to create or to promote certain issues. Some of them are new, and some of them have been advocated before, and they're getting re-promoted a second time. So this is very exciting to see all of the effort coming together here on the 1.30 release. The issue that I've been seeing picking up a lot of attention, we mentioned just last week, which is putting Fast Token Browser into core. And it seemed like it was stuck last week because the JavaScript needed to be rewritten, and now that seems to have been overcome. I haven't had a chance to look at this in the past week, but Martin, I think you've been involved a little bit here. Do you have anything to say about this issue?
It was something RGPiano identified a while ago, that the JavaScript needed to be namespaced to avoid any conflicts, and so this was kind of added as a possibility for 1.30, and the JavaScript was raised as a blocker, and then within a couple of hours there was some 2 pull requests, and decided to go with RGPianos, and RGPianos sort of identified a couple of other issues that is addressed in very short order, and it's now looking quite good. It respects the show restricted and the click insert flag. So on token help, it doesn't show links, and it will show. It will only so TNID is one example of a show restricted. It will show in token help, but it won't show in alias patterns. And RGPiano has also fixed a caching issue, where if you opened the whichever one you opened first, that would cache. So he's tweaked the caching, so you've got a separate cache record. So for show restricted and for not. So yeah, it all looks really good. So he's done the changes both in the contrib module and the and in the pull request. So
yeah, this is great.
If others want to test, that would be great. So far, it's had myself and Herb looking at it, but if others want to test, because this is quite a big UI change, but it's certainly looking good.
Yeah, this is great. I like that it's it's a full replacement. It's just getting rid of what we had previously and replacing it with something else that is an improved version. I like that for something like this where there's not a lot of backwards compatibility concern. I'm not even sure the old token browser is alterable. And even if it were it's alterable through like hook token info alter, but yeah, this is great. Yeah, that's really good. And generally speaking, what this is doing is it's making it so that when you open the token browser, it's loading dynamically each child section. So every time you expand it expands that dynamically instead of loading every token in the whole system all at once. Yeah, and I was just thinking if there was any need, like if making it be dynamic and Ajax driven had any downsides, but the entire token browser itself is all dependent on JavaScript. Like it's all considered to be enhancement. Like if you don't have access to the if you don't have JavaScript, there's no other there's no fallback. I'm trying to think like if there's like the browse available tokens, like what happens? Like what happens if I middle click on this? Like does it take me to a page?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to break it and see what happens when we do that.
Yeah, it's worth saying that sometimes, so if you have lots of lots of content types and lots of fields, perhaps you also have paragraph types as well. And maybe you have the entity tokens module which you need if you kind of want to chain from a content type to a paragraph type in the field. With the old token browser, you could actually end up with things crashing without knowing why it was crashing. And so this helps that because it only loads what you need, whereas the previous token browser would load everything all at once. So you would get the page grinding to a halt and sometimes not even loading before.
Yeah. This probably won't be surprising to anybody, but my feedback initially is going to be this needs some test coverage. Even though it's JavaScript based, we can still like test the responses from this new route, and I think that would be a good idea for us to include. But yeah, I'll leave a more comprehensive feedback on this issue. But that's great to see this coming so far so fast. Okay, let's move on. Next up, we've got this issue, which could use some more discussion. This is related to an issue that has been marked RTBC. It was in a bug fix release, but I moved it to 1.30 because if we remove this one fix, this one workaround, which is for MySQL 5.1, it will effectively raise our minimum PHP version. So here's the workaround that, I'm sorry, it's for MySQL 5.0. That it just removes this like strip out this comment thing that was a bug specifically in a very old version of MySQL. And if we remove this workaround, then that effectively increases our minimum PHP version. And it got me just curious about what is our minimum PHP version and why is it what it is?
Wait, how can you explain how changing a MySQL thing changes a PHP thing?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say PHP. I've been meaning, if I said PHP, I meant MySQL.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. So looking at the MySQL versions, like, and their general support windows, our minimum version of MySQL is 5.0, which I don't even know when the end of life support was, but it was before 2013.
So the
and
likelihood of anyone running a backdrop site on MySQL 5.0 is very low.
yes, extraordinarily low.
Okay.
Also, we do have, oh, I should have linked to it. We do have telemetry on this.
Great.
Let's see, Start. And overall, I know it's kind of a mess here because we've got MySQL and
MariaDB.
MariaDB all mixed together and they're not sorted, but
There's a
we do have
5.5.
5.5 is the lowest represented version.
Okay.
But this
That's a
number
lot.
here, well, this number here, I flagged it. That's actually probably not MySQL 5.5.
Oh,
MySQL 5.5, that's what almost every version of MariaDB was incorrectly reporting as prior to Backdrop 128.3. So it's only been corrected for a short period of time, but that number has dropped from 4,400 to 219.
Yeah, interesting.
And we've gotten a lot more like 10.6,
Which are Maria.
10.7, they all got split up into their correct MariaDB versions because we started recording it correctly. So yeah, this is a crazy hack that MariaDB introduced to make it so that old MySQL clients could connect to new MariaDB servers. It was a
Yeah.
really strange workaround that they put in there that to MySQL clients, they say, hey, I'm MySQL 5.5, even though it's MariaDB. And that tripped us up because when we ask PHP for the driver version, MariaDB says 5.5, and that's why we reported 5.5, because we fell for the same trap that MySQL clients did, where it intentionally misreported itself, and it took us a little work to correct that. So the 5.5 numbers are probably much lower, but maybe not zero. I do think there is, so here's 5.7 is quite popular. And let's see if we can find a 5.6 in here. Okay, and there's 4 5.6 sites. So it's pretty likely that there's a 5.5 site out there as well. But less likely that there's anything. I'm not even sure there is, looking at this list, I'm not even sure there is MySQL 5.2 to 5.4. Like it might have jumped from 5.1 to 5.5? Question mark? I don't know. So this is the overall question. And it's all stemmed from this, like, remove this workaround for a version of MySQL that hasn't been supported in 12 years or more. So, I mean, we also have the total option of not doing any of this, right? We could continue to support this ancient version of MySQL, leave the workaround in place, and not worry about it. But there's a certain aspect of not needing to support stuff that is like this ancient, that would be beneficial, I think, from a maintenance standpoint and from really even from a site owner standpoint, that if you haven't updated your server in over a decade, it's time to do that. We have some precedents for this, that we dropped support for old versions of PHP. We dropped support of versions from PHP from 5 to 5.5 and started requiring 5.6 as the minimum. And so this is a similar level of increase where we're increasing it to the last known supported version, like, or version that is in use, even though that version also hasn't been supported for a terribly, or it hasn't been unsupported. Has been unsupported for a while yet. I guess only 3 years. That's not that long. So yeah, thoughts about where we should head with this? There's the do nothing, the do a little bit, which would be just bumping to 5.1, or do, a bit more by jumping to 5.5.
I missed part of this discussion. What are we currently supporting?
5.0.
5.0.
Okay. Well, I don't know.
Is the
go
is
ahead.
the requirement for doing, or the benefit for doing this just that we can remove the workaround? There's not like a specific feature that this enables?
Well, that's a great question. The stimulus for this was so that we can remove the workaround, yes. But the benefit is unclear. If there are other peripheral benefits, like it is possible that we could potentially start using capabilities that were introduced, 10 years ago into MySQL that could yield some benefits, capabilities that were introduced in between 5.0 and 5.5. But those benefits have not been enumerated. Maybe that's a good justification. Like if we could reinforce that with, if we do this, we also get these benefits.
Right. I think for me to take an opinion, that's what I'm looking for, is what do we benefit? And if there's some good reasons to do it, some features we want to use that we can't currently now, it wouldn't take much to justify it. But I'm a little bit skeptical of the need to do, if we're not getting any benefit, then why do we need to do it?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't feel strongly about this, so I could be easily convinced. I mean, I think if you're going to move forward, you might as well go to 5.5 or what, the newer one, because it seemed like. But if we don't need to do either, then
Yeah. I'm in the same boat as you, Tim, I think, where it's like either we don't do anything or we make a
Mhm.
jump.
Yeah.
Because I think just bumping to 5.1,
Mhm.
just so that we can remove this workaround, and the workaround doesn't really give us any benefit.
Mhm.
Removing the workaround doesn't really give us any benefit. Yeah. Let's see. Telemetry. Yeah. Yeah, this has just been carried along for a little while.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll think more about that. It's been surfaced. People out there watch this video, they also can weigh in on issue 6724.
I feel like the thing that I would actually want to get from bumping the version is the JSON columns, but I think that's a much more recent change.
Mm.
So I'm not sure that's a feasible option.
Yeah. There's looking forward into the future. I worry MySQL and MariaDB have started diverging in very noticeable ways. The compatibility between them is starting to drift quite a bit. I think it was just recently, a lot of people got disrupted because doing database dumps from MariaDB can no longer be imported by MySQL. They did something in the name of a security fix, but it thoroughly broke compatibility between the ability to import from one and export from one and import into the other. So
I did in B, I added a flag, an option to deal with that in the DB import because it was causing a few problems for myself and a few other users. So we've added a flag into B for the DB import because it was a nightmare. But
So yeah, exactly. I'm glad that you know what I'm talking about. That these deviations, like that one example to me almost is like um, it could break the dam, so to speak, as far as like incompatibilities between MySQL and MariaDB. And if that happens, what I worry about is backdrops need to potentially support more than one database driver again. Uh, if MySQL and Maria diverge enough that we would end up having two drivers. Maybe it's an unwarranted fear. And we don't really use hardly any cutting edge features from MySQL just because we have such a broad version support. Like where it's going to start really deviating is when, our minimum MySQL version becomes MySQL 8 and the minimum MariaDB version starts becoming version 10. Because that's where, they even stopped using the same version tracking. So yeah, maybe a fear that we don't need to worry about, but I could totally see it happening. And so I'm kind of, we haven't talked about removing or adjusting dbTNG in a long time. But now with this potential concern in the future, I'm kind of relieved that we still have it as an option if it ever came down to that we needed to add a MariaDB driver.
I don't think we've done anything that would prevent that. Like we could just take the old drivers and drop them back in.
Yeah, we actually can, and that's what the not PressFlow, Silkscreen does. Literally the only thing that we have in Backdrop that prevents other drivers is that we hard code the driver name, so you can't swap it out. So literally where the line says like, look for a driver, we just don't have the line anymore that says allow another driver, and it just says MySQL now, and then points to the MySQL driver. But yes, could totally happen. Yeah, Backdrop has changed a lot in its priorities. We very early Backdrop days, we were in many ways trying to roll back what we thought were missteps in the Drupal 7 cycle, trying to fix some of those things. But now really our focus has shifted towards embracing what Drupal 7 had and making it so that Drupal 7 users can move forward and that familiarity with Drupal 7 applies to Backdrop. So yeah, stuff like removing the drivers, if we had the same philosophy now as we did when the Backdrop project started, they probably would still be in Backdrop, I would say. I'm just opining now at this point.
Okay.
Okay, let's see, other issues. Or does anybody have any other thoughts on MySQL before we move forward?
No.
Okay. This issue has been asked about a couple weeks in a row, and we haven't been able to get to it during the dev meeting, so I wanted to raise it here. It's issue 6693. RG Piano has been working with Laren to make it so that we add a link field form API element. And he got stuck on this and he wanted some advice, but it seemed like he got unstuck. This new approach introduces a single attribute, I believe. Yeah, here it is, link field options. And then inside of link field options, then provides a set of, okay, here's all the new values here. So I like where this is heading. That now instead of adding, 10 or I'm not quite sure what the total number of attributes is, a handful of new attributes that only work on one particular field on this new link field element. There's now a single new attribute called link field options that we can document. This link field options has these sub properties, and so it's only one new property that works specifically on this one particular element. And then we can document all of the sub properties underneath that. This looks great. This is exactly what I was hoping to see. Yeah, so this looks nice. It was flagged as a one dot as a bug fix candidate. I would be tempted to say this isn't really a bug fix, that this is a feature to expand link field. So I put it in the 1.30 milestone, but yeah, it's looking really good. This could use some review. Okay, and then we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to circle back on the topic from last week, which is backup and migrate functionality in core. This got quite a bit of visibility this week, and I haven't weighed back in on this issue since then. But yeah, Izzy and Gozella, Olaf, all came in here discussing this. Oh, and Doc Wilmot, yay, discussing this. And it seems like everybody is pretty excited about the overall direction. And conceptually, we haven't had any opposition. There has been some confusion, and this is probably my fault, about where backups would be stored. And I think the confusion arises because I'd mentioned storing it in the private files directory as being a possible option or a good option. And it wasn't until later that I realized that what we can and should probably do is treat the backups directory like the config directories. And so when you install Backdrop, the config directories are created. They're not inside of the private or the public files directory. They're assigned an htaccess file and they're randomly generated a hash to kind of protect their location. And they can be located, and we encourage them to be located outside of the web root. But the combination of an htaccess and a random hash, we consider that to be good enough to keep the config safe from prying eyes. And this is going to be
database backups a lot more serious than config files.
I would say that yes, but config should be treated with the same level of concern as databases, maybe not the inverse, right? But I see what you're saying there. But
I mean, I think this is a good default because we're not going to have private files, but I also think it might warrant like a warning in the status report that's like it would be much better if you had enabled private files for backups and sort of just encourage people to do things in a better way. Maybe not an error, but like a warning.
well, I think that requiring that we turn on private files would have a number of other undesirable side effects. Like if you turn on private files, that modifies the UI of Backdrop in other places. Like when you
Create a
configure and
file, asks
upload
you.
a
Yeah.
file field, you might not want private files,
Well,
and
what
having
if
the
we-
choice there might confuse people.
What if we then put a warning and was like, we recommend you place these outside your doc root or in a more secure location or something
Mhm.
that is like we do with config where, you can move the config directory around in your settings file. If we did something like that, where it was like, we highly recommend your backups directory not be web accessible, and then have a link to some documentation page or something,
Yeah, I agree.
that'd be okay.
Yeah,
Rather than the default recommendation being private files, the default recommendation would be, if you can move these on your server, you should.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And moving it outside or not storing backups in the private files directory also is beneficial in that, in my
They're not
opinion,
managed.
They're not managed. Yeah. If it's in the
Yeah.
public or private files directory, it should also be in the file managed table, and you shouldn't just be
Yeah.
storing arbitrary stuff in there. And so by putting it outside, that clearly indicates that these things are not managed in the database somewhere. And they shouldn't be managed in the database because literally you can import from that directory a database copy. And so storing it in the database is impossible when what you're
Yeah.
recording is database backups.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I love it.
This got me thinking, there's some security hardening we could potentially do. It's funny that we're like, oh, this is a special situation when literally private files and config are
Do it.
protected in similar mechanisms and have
Yeah.
similar problems. It's just that now we're a little bit more concerned because the database is even more sensitive than those two other things. But it's really the same problem, just with a different level of concern.
Are you
Uh,
talking about like htaccess only works for Apache?
Yeah, like that
Yeah.
your private files directory might not really be protected with Backdrop's default protections. That
Yeah.
there's a pretty good chance that you could have a misconfigured server if you're using Nginx, for example. But this got me thinking, like maybe another enhancement we can do. Drupal may have evaluated this at some point, but I don't think we have. That our status check could try to do something a little bit more real to life to verify if your protected files are actually protected. Right now, we only check for the existence of an htaccess file and only if you're running Apache. But what we could attempt to do is do an HTTP request against a sample file in that directory and see if we can access it via curl or something like that. That we could actually verify if access is denied via an HTTP request and not just check for what should be providing the protection, but actually see if the protection is in place. And that would make me feel a lot better, at least about correctly identifying like if your protected locations are really protected or not. To be determined what the default functionality should be. We haven't really come across that question yet. Like when you install Backdrop, should the backups directory be created for you? Maybe it should hinge off of update module, that one checkbox, if you check for updates, it also by default creates a backup directory. I don't know. We can discuss that, where we want that to be. Or and we might do a slow iteration of it's not turned on. First of all, existing sites is definitely going to be turned off. We won't modify that for existing sites. They'll need to turn it on manually if they want it. But on new installations, we might slow roll, like, the option is available if you want to, and then in a later release, we might turn it on by default for new installations. So it's not really a question we need to answer right now, because when we first add this capability, it'll be opt-in. But in the future, we should think about, what's the desirable default behavior. Okay. Well, we're out of time. Does anybody have any thoughts before we close? Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you out there to our viewers. And we'll close now for the community meeting. Slight
Design
preview.
today.
It's going to talk about possible update for backdropcms.org, says Tim in the Zulip channel. So that could be exciting.